Well, I hope you've been keeping up because this episode is going to get heavy and strong. So let us begin with this episode. I believe it's 28. And remember, he just says Sly's always been a very important member of the team. We need him. I need him. Besides, it's the least I can do for a champ. After all, I know what it's like to lose a brother as the transmission ended. And now we continue. Christian is visibly bothered as he says, I gotta get some air. He opens the door and exits quickly over to the back of the train and into the tree line, completely out of sight. Sword Boy stands poised and begins to speak. Kirk, 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 Champ Kent, also known as Aqua Force, a master of water and ice and force fields. Kirk. Your performance was slow, sluggish, and not well thought out. By using your force field on the others, you kept them in prisons and hindered their abilities to help you. And now let's continue with a brief introduction. I didn't have any water with me, as I have had in the past. When I was in the power suit, I always kept those water tanks strapped on my back full. You should have been prepared, snapped Sword Boy, machine-like voice. Yes, you're right. Holding up these bottles of water, he says, we won't have that problem anymore. I promise you. Sword Boy turns to Marie and says, Marie, Marie Kent, wife of Champ Kent, also known as the Eclipse. Your powers of invisibility, ability to stick to walls and ceilings, seeing in the dark, and creating darkness. Kirk. Your evaluation is as follows. Just then, GQ returns and hits a hidden switch just under Sword Boy's arm that suddenly deactivates him. Christian turns to Murray with a sneer and says, I'll give you your evaluation, love. You stink. You best stay close to your husband. Marie's mouth falls open and she's about to speak when he turns to Bailey and says warmly, You, dear, were perfect. Although I do have one suggestion that I would like to make to you in private, if you don't mind. He concludes with a flirtatious smile. Bailey coldly tightens up and has nothing to say as Baby Doll steps in front of her and eyeballs her husband and says, Leave her alone and stick to business, Christian. Can you do that just this one time? Concludes Baby Doll with unusual sarcasm. Fine, says Christian angrily as he folds his arms and turns his back away from them. He walks over to Sword Boy and pushes the button to start him up again. Sword Boy's movements begin with a jerking motion and he begins where he left off. Kirk, your responses were, Stow it, mate. I've already given it to him. Disregard. Evaluation BD 50270 and file for future reference. GQ code 22153. Sword Boy cocks his head slightly and as in processing and then compiles as he resumes his standing position awaiting further orders. We need to go, says Baby Doll. Everybody, take a seat and make yourself comfortable. Christian, would you please join me up in front of the engine room? We need to sort out a few things before we go any farther, explains Baby Doll with a sense of tired sadness in her voice. Christian shares the same emotional defeat as he exhales and drops his head slightly and follows her through the front door of the engine room. And now we're at chapter 22. The Truth About Villains. After about 10 minutes, Christian returns by himself and looks at Marie directly in her eyes and says dourly, Baby Doll would like to talk to you. Marie stands up wearily, of Christian, and with spite and personal disdain for him, quickly passes through the door as it silently opens and closes behind her. After a few minutes of complete silence, Christian stares at the floor, as the floor concludes, as he raises his eyes slowly to stare at the door. No, as his eyes slowly stare at Champ and Bailey with a strange kind of somberness, says, "I would like to apologize for my actions. I wish I could tell you why I act this way sometimes, but I can't. I just can't." Baby Doll and Champ look at each other wearily with suspicion and fearing they may be getting duped into something that smarts with his personal grandiose opinion of himself. Christian seems to be genuinely troubled. His demeanor reflects a suppressed anger that seems to be building and is ready to erupt. Champ has seen this before in the past with some of his struggling students. He expects this to happen sooner than later. Moments later, it turns out like this. "It's crank! It's all Krampus!" he says angrily to no one in particular. He stares at the floor and seems to be calculating and debating with himself as if he should go on and elaborate or just to swallow it and forget it. He finally gets tired with the internal debate and gives way to saying, "Did you ever wonder why we became the villains instead of the heroes?" Both Champ and Bailey look dumbfounded at each other, not expecting this kind of question nor even understanding it. Champ replies cautiously, "I never really thought about it." "Well, think about it. Who wants to be a villain? Why would anybody in their right mind want to be the villain in a story or facet in their life? Would you have come to Notlam to share this little adventure of ours if you knew you were going to be the bad guys?" Champ says diplomatically, "I don't know. I guess it would depend." Christian looks precariously at Champ, wondering why he answered that way. Was he being facetious, or was he just ignorant? He thinks to himself. Christian casts a sign of disappointment toward Champ and turns to Bailey Wilder. "How about you, Bailey? Would you really have chosen to be the bad guy? Really? Does it make sense why I would?" Bailey feels the awkwardness of suddenly getting sucked into the conversation that even Champ seems to avoid having. Yet, she admits to herself that she is a little intrigued at the direction of the conversation. She surrenders her second thoughts in favor of expediency and curiosity and says, "I guess I wouldn't like it either. I think I would want to be the good guy, the hero." Christian smiles brightly and says, "Exactly. After all, who doesn't want to be the hero, the good guy? Am I right? I mean, to save the girl and get all the well-deserved accolades would just be so rewarding and fulfilling. Am I right?" Not waiting for an answer, Christian moves closer to Champ and Bailey and pointing to himself and says with theatrical drama, "So why me? Why Nathan? Why so special? What's so special about us? Why are we the villains?" he concludes with ugly bitterness. Champ remains motionless as he intently listens and studies the man. Bailey takes note of this and follows a similar course. Christian smiles back at him, seemingly aware of their thoughts and intention. He folds his arms together and says in a matter-of-fact way, because we, my friends, are the misfits of society. The undesirables, rejects, the incurables, the lepers of society. A few seconds passes as before Champ replies, I'm sorry, Christian, I'm really lost about what you're talking about. Come on, Champ, think. After all those years as a school history teacher, you cannot even venture a guess, lad? All right, if you insist. I'm guessing you're telling me that you're all criminals and were convicts from back home and had a bad start in life, and that you want to make us feel sorry for you. Is that what you're trying to say? Christian exhales quickly, deeply, and exhales slowly as a pause. With great deliberation, he says, with suppressed frustration, hardly. I think some of us wish we were just that. Only that. Then what? Says Champ, becoming tired of all this dancing around the subject. Bailey, do you remember the story I told you about my racing career? Yes, on the Isle of Man. I told you I had to give up after I took a bit of a tumble. You were hurt? Asked Bailey. Yes, as he closed his eyes quickly with regret and opens them. How bad? Asked Champ with curiosity. Christian lifts his eyes to theirs. The left side of his face quivers, and his eyes moisten. With great effort, he chokes out, I became paralyzed from the accident. You mean on Earth you were paralyzed? Questions Bailey, almost ashamed of being so judgmental of him not that long ago. Yes, but it wasn't right away, says Christian as he looks away for a second and digs his thumbnail into his teeth as if to remove something he ate. What do you mean? Asked Champ, still trying to connect all the dots of the history. In time, I healed, and it looked like everything was going to be okay. But things didn't turn out the way I wanted them to. How so? Asked Bailey with a newfound sense of concern and curiosity. You see, weeks before the race, I had fallen under some bad times. I was always lucky in cards and not so much with love. Story of my life. That is, until I met Karen Sue. She was a gorgeous red hair with a stunning beauty that just wouldn't quit. She was everything to me. But that's another story, replies Christian dourly. One day I started to feel a slight numbness in my left hand. It would come and go. I mentioned it to Karen Sue, and she insisted that I go to the doctor, get it checked out, and get some medicine for it. But I knew I had a good chance to win this particular race since one of my biggest competitors injured himself earlier in the week in practice and had to drop out. The numbness continued, and it began to get worse. I was afraid that if I had something very bad that I would not be allowed in the big race. Karen Sue sensed my fear and began to push on me, to pull me out of the race. She threatened to leave me and never see me again. The pressure from her and the others was starting to get to me, and my deep-rooted fear that something was actually wrong with me caused me to act irrationally. So I started to drink a lot and started to gamble again. When I first met Karen Sue, I quit all that and went straight. But now I was desperate. I started to think about our future and wanted for it to be truly glorious. Then, as I do when I drink and drink and drink. and I started to gamble very badly. I started losing money at the tables where I had made quite a name for myself in the past. I ran myself into such a bit of a hole, my mates insisted that I race and not to pull out. Otherwise, old Seamus was going to kick off my head and break both of my legs. And I knew he would do it. So my mates helped me by getting me a sponsor and making sure Karen Sue didn't know anything about the big race. At that point, I knew I was way over my head. I had no choice. I not only had to race, but I had to win. They had bet a boatload on me and could not afford to lose. So you see, winning the big race was my only option. And you wiped out of the course and lost, guesses Champ. Oh, heavens no, lad. As I said before, I'm good. I did win the race. But at the end of the race, I did have a small problem. My one hand cramped up and I locked up on the throttle. I ended up running my bike full bore through and crashed through another competitor's sponsor and totally obliterated his sexy girl poster wearing only now a smile. They all thought I did it on purpose to be theatrical as I had done in the past. They didn't know how hurt I really was. But I sucked it up, and after I had my picture taken, exchanged a few expletives with the competition, I was given my trophy and my check, and then my mates drove me to the hospital. As I laid there, the doctors did some tests on me, and when they returned, they brought me some news. And it wasn't good. What was the news? Asked Bailey. Christian drops his head for a second, bites down on his bottom lip, smothering an emotional outburst. He regains his composure as he pushes out the bitter words with great effort. The doctor said I had ALS. Oh my, says Bailey as she puts her hand to her mouth in shock. She reaches out to touch his hand for comfort, but instinctively pulls it back before she touches him. ALS? That's amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, says Champ, as if verifying it and slightly wagging his head. Yes. They also call it Lou Gehrig disease, quips Bailey. Ah, so you have heard about it. Do you know what it does to a person? Asked Christian Shark. Champ looks at Bailey as both agree with their eyes not to answer. It's a disease that progresses rapidly and attacks the motor neurons of, or some would say, the nerve cells in the spinal cord. What makes it so bad and debilitating is this. The motor neurons began to die. They're the ones responsible for transmitting messages from the brain to the voluntary muscles throughout the body. ALS causes the motor neurons to degenerate and die, leading to progressive paralysis. Mine was one of the most common ALS, the sporadic. I'm sorry, says Champ. No need to know. No need to know now. Why, look at me, as he stands up quickly and pulls a card out of his back pocket and puts it in front of him, and poof, Jipu appears out of the blue smoke as a well-dressed man in a tuxedo with a top hat, cane, and long tails. He smiles with gleaming white teeth and with his high-polished black shoes as he begins to tap dance with blinding speed, singing, I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling, I'm happy again. As his cane quickly touches into an umbrella, he firmly finishes his little act with high-speed tap number and rolling his hat off his head with long, nimble fingers. He smiles, catching his breath, and both Bailey and Champ look with awkwardness, and the impromptu performance comes to an end. He stands, smiles, replies with warm gratitude. "Nottingham has been a second chance for me like you can't believe. No matter what the cost is, I'm never going to give it up," swears Christian Shark, with both as still touched and moved by the story. They both continue to look at each other, dumbfounded at what this is to be. So you're probably wondering about Thomas Nathan Torres, how he fit into this question. That will be discussed in the next episode. This is the other part of the family that just joined us and everything. We're making this tape for them.